Let me start by saying, I'm not the kind of person who goes looking for trouble. In fact, I've always tried to avoid it. I believe in solving problems with calm conversations and finding ways to work things out peacefully. But life has a funny way of testing you. And sometimes, no matter how hard you try to avoid conflict, it finds you anyway. That's exactly what happened to me. It all began with Karen. If you've ever lived in a neighborhood with a homeowners association, HOA, you probably know the type. Someone who takes their role way too seriously. Karen wasn't just any HOA member. She was the queen of nitpicking. She walked around the neighborhood like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, ready to pounce on anyone who dared to break even the smallest rule. And trust me, there were a lot of rules. At first, I thought Karen was harmless. Sure, she sent me letters about leaving my trash, can out for an extra hour, or planting flowers that didn't match the approved color palette. But I figured it was just her way of keeping the neighborhood looking nice. So I fixed the issues, followed the rules, and tried to stay out of her way. After all, I didn't want to cause any drama. My family and I had moved to this neighborhood to enjoy a peaceful life, not to get into arguments with nosy neighbors. But Karen wasn't satisfied with just enforcing the rules. Over time, she started pushing boundaries, crossing lines that made people uncomfortable. She'd show up uninvited to inspect someone's yard, peek over fences, and even question parents about how they raised their kids. It was as if she thought she had the right to control every little detail of our lives. Most of us ignored her antics, hoping she'd eventually lose interest. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. One day, I realized Karen had set her sights on me. It started small, notes taped to my front door, emails pointing out minor infractions. But soon, it felt like she was watching my every move. At first, I laughed it off. What's the big deal? I thought. It's just a few silly rules. But then the notes became more frequent, the tone harsher. Every little thing I did seemed to upset her. My mailbox was leaning slightly. Violation. My garden hose was left outside overnight. Another violation. It was exhausting. The worst part wasn't the fines or the constant nagging. It was the feeling of being watched. Every time I stepped outside, I couldn't shake the sensation that someone was lurking nearby, waiting to catch me doing something wrong. I began second-guessing myself, wondering if I'd accidentally broken some obscure rule without realizing it. Was my lawn green enough? Were my curtains symmetrical? Had I parked my car at the exact angle required by the HOA handbook? Despite everything, I told myself to stay calm. I reminded myself that Karen was just one person, and that most of my neighbors were decent, reasonable people. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the growing unease. Something about Karen felt off. Her obsession with rules wasn't normal, and her behavior was starting to feel less like concern for the neighborhood and more like a personal vendetta. Little did I know, things were about to get much worse. What happened next would change everything, not just for me, but for my entire family. It was one of those warm, sunny afternoons that made you feel grateful for life, the kind where the air smells fresh and the world feels just a little bit brighter. My wife, Sarah, and our 2 kids were in the backyard, enjoying the simple pleasures of family time. Our youngest, Emma, was giggling as she chased butterflies, while my son, Jake, practiced his basketball shots on the hoop we'd set up near the fence. Sarah sat on a blanket under the shade of a tree, watching them with a soft smile on her face. I had stepped inside for a moment to grab a glass of lemonade, thinking nothing of it. It was peaceful, too peaceful, really. And then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching across the grass on the side of the house. At first, I thought maybe it was a neighbor cutting through or perhaps a delivery person dropping off a package. But something about the rhythm of the steps felt deliberate, heavy, like whoever it was didn't care if they were noticed. Curious, and a little uneasy, I walked toward the noise. That's when I saw her. Karen. She was standing right there on my property, marching across my yard like she belonged there. In one hand, she held her phone, snapping pictures of everything in sight. Her other hand clutched her ever-present clipboard, though I couldn't imagine what she was jotting down this time. "Hey," I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. "What are you doing?" "You're trespassing." Karen barely glanced at me. Without missing a beat, she pointed to the wooden fence along the edge of the yard. "Your fence is leaning," she said matter-of-factly, as if that explained everything. "It's against HOA guidelines. I'm documenting it." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "You can't just walk onto my property without permission," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "Get off now." She smirked, her lips curling into that smug expression I'd come to dread. "Relax," she said dismissively. "It's not like you own the whole subdivision. Besides, I'm doing my job." Her casual attitude only fueled my frustration. "This is private property," I shot back, taking a step closer. "You don't have the right to be here. If you want to report something, do it from the sidewalk like everyone else." Instead of leaving, Karen ignored me completely. To my horror, she started heading straight toward my family. Sarah noticed her too and immediately stood up, positioning herself between Karen and the kids. Emma stopped chasing butterflies and clung to Sarah's leg, her wide eyes filled with confusion. Jake dropped the basketball, looking unsure whether to run or stand his ground. "What are you doing here?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. There was a protective edge to her tone that sent a chill down my spine. Karen didn't even acknowledge her. Instead, she raised her phone again, aiming it directly at my kids. "Cute setup you've got here," she said coldly. "Too bad it's illegal according to HOA standards. Guess we'll see how much your husband values his precious family time once he gets slapped with fines." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. Sarah gasped, pulling Emma closer to her chest. Even Jake looked scared, his usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could someone be so cruel, so heartless? This wasn't about rules anymore. It felt personal. When Karen took another step closer to my family, something inside me shifted. Fear gave way to anger, and I realized I couldn't let this go any further. Whatever her intentions were, I knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to intimidate us. "Enough," I shouted, storming toward her. "You need to leave. Now." But Karen didn't seem fazed. Not yet, anyway. Karen's smirk only deepened as I approached her, my voice rising with every word. "You heard me," I said firmly, trying to mask the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "Get off my property. Right now." Instead of backing down, she stood her ground, meeting my glare with an icy stare of her own. For a moment, we were locked in a silent battle of wills, neither of us willing to budge. Then, without warning, she yanked her arm freed from my grip and took a step back. Her expression hardened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than arrogance, something that looked like rage. "Don't touch me," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Do you have any idea who I am? You'll regret this." Her words hung in the air, heavy and menacing, but they didn't scare me. Not anymore. What scared me was the way she kept glancing past me, toward my family. Sarah still stood protectively in front of the kids, her arms wrapped tightly around Emma, while Jake hovered nearby, his eyes darting between Karen and me. They were scared, and it was my job to make sure they stayed safe. But Karen wasn't done yet. If anything, her behavior grew even more unsettling. She tilted her head slightly, studying my family like they were exhibits in a museum. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she raised her phone again. This time, she pointed it directly at them, snapping photos as if she had every right to do so. "Stop that," I shouted, stepping between her and my family. My heart was pounding now, each beat echoing in my ears. "What do you think you're doing?" "Oh, come on," she said mockingly, lowering the phone just enough to meet my gaze. "It's not like I'm doing anything illegal, just gathering evidence for the HOA board. You know, documenting how your unsafe property might be putting others at risk." Her tone was casual, almost playful, but her words sent a chill through me. Gathering evidence, documenting risks, none of it made sense. We weren't breaking any laws. We were simply living our lives. And yet here she was, acting as if she had the authority to invade our privacy and threaten our peace. That's when she crossed the final line. With a smug grin, she added, "Maybe I should call Child Protective Services. After all, raising kids in such a hazardous environment, it's practically negligence." The room seemed to tilt as her words sank in. Negligence. My wife and I worked tirelessly to provide a safe, loving home for our children. The idea that someone would accuse us of failing them was beyond insulting. It was cruel. Worse, it felt calculated, designed to hurt us where it mattered most. Sarah gasped behind me, clutching Emma even tighter. "How dare you?" she said, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and fury. "You don't get to talk about my kids like that. You don't get to threaten my family." Karen ignored her completely, focusing instead on me. Her smile widened, revealing teeth that suddenly looked far too sharp. "Oh, and don't think I haven't noticed your gun safe in the garage," she said, nodding toward the window. "I wonder what the HOA would say about that. Or the police, for that matter. Maybe someone should report you." Her implication hit me like a freight train. Was she threatening to involve the authorities? To turn our lives upside down over some twisted vendetta? It was impossible to tell if she was bluffing or serious, but either way, her words echoed in my mind, sharp and venomous. "Maybe someone should report you." It wasn't just a casual comment. It was a threat, plain and simple. Karen's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she watched me process what she'd said. She wanted me to feel cornered, powerless. But instead of fear, something else began to rise inside me, resolve. I couldn't let her manipulate us anymore. Not when she was standing there, smirking like she held all the cards. Not when she was threatening the people I loved most. Every instinct in my body screamed that this had gone too far. There was no reasoning with someone like her. No calm conversation or polite explanation that would make her back down. This wasn't about rules or guidelines anymore. This was personal. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the house. My hands were shaking as I pushed open the door, but I forced myself to stay focused. In the corner of the garage sat our gun safe, a precaution we'd taken years ago after a string of break-ins in a nearby neighborhood. I'd always hoped I'd never need to use it, that it would remain locked away forever as nothing more than a safeguard. But today felt different. Today, everything felt uncertain. As I unlocked the safe and retrieved the firearm, my heart raced. I didn't want to escalate things. I hated confrontation. But I also knew I couldn't stand by and let Karen intimidate my family any further. If she thought she could barge onto my property, threaten my wife and kids, and walk away unchallenged, she was wrong. Dead wrong. When I stepped back outside, Karen was still standing there, unfazed, as though she owned the world. Her clipboard rested lazily against her hip, and her phone dangled from her fingers. She looked up at me, her eyebrows arching slightly when she saw. The minutes after Karen left felt like hours. The backyard, once filled with laughter and warmth, now seemed eerily quiet. The air was heavy, as if the tension she brought with her still lingered, refusing to dissipate. I stood there for a moment, clutching the firearm in my hand, unsure of what to do next. My mind raced with questions. Would she really call the police? What would they say when they arrived? Was I wrong to pull the gun? Sarah broke the silence first, her voice trembling but steady. "What happens now?" she asked, her eyes searching mine for answers I wasn't sure I had. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "We wait," I said finally. "If she calls the police, we'll explain everything. We'll tell them the truth, how she trespassed, how she threatened us, how she wouldn't leave even when I asked her to." "But will they believe us?" Sarah pressed, her arms still wrapped protectively around Emma. Her fear was palpable, and it made me feel even more responsible for keeping everyone safe. "They'll have to," I replied, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. She can't just walk onto someone's property and act like that. People will see that. As if on cue, the sound of distant sirens pierced the quiet afternoon. At first, I thought I might be imagining it, hoping it was just a car passing by. But then the noise grew louder, closer. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of the house, their lights flashing silently. My stomach tightened as I watched the officers step out of their cars. They approached cautiously, their hands resting near their holsters. One of them, a tall man with graying hair, spoke first. "Sir, we received a report about an incident here. Can you tell us what happened?" I nodded, my throat dry. "Yes, officer," I began, doing my best to sound calm and collected. "A woman named Karen, you might know her, she's part of the HOA, came onto my property uninvited. She started taking pictures of my family and making threats. When I asked her to leave, she refused. That's when I showed her the gun to make it clear I wasn't going to tolerate her behavior." The officer raised an eyebrow, glancing between me and the firearm still in my hand. "Where is the gun now?" he asked. "It's right here," I said, holding it out carefully. But I didn't point it at her or anything. I just wanted her to understand that I was serious about protecting my family. The second officer, a younger woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "Do you have any witnesses who saw what happened?" she asked. Before I could answer, Sarah spoke up from behind me. "We were all here," she said firmly, stepping forward with Emma still clinging to her side. "Karen came into our yard without permission. She ignored my husband when he told her to leave, and she kept getting closer to the kids. It was terrifying." Jake chimed in too, his voice small but steady. "Yeah, she wouldn't stop taking pictures of us. And she said mean stuff about my mom and dad." The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. Then the older one turned back to me. "Did anyone else see Karen come onto your property?" he asked. That's when something unexpected happened. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson, an elderly neighbor who rarely interacted with anyone, stepped out onto her porch. "I saw everything," she called out, her voice carrying across the lawn. "That woman marched right onto their property like she owned the place. They asked her to leave multiple times, but she wouldn't budge. It was completely inappropriate." Another neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, appeared in his driveway. "I saw it too," he added. "Karen's been causing problems for months. This isn't the first time she's gone too far." Their support caught me off guard, but it also gave me hope. Maybe this wasn't just my word against hers. Maybe others were finally tired of her antics too. The officers listened intently, jotting down notes as the neighbors spoke. After a few moments, the older officer turned back to me. "All right, sir," he said. "Based on what we've heard so far, it sounds like this was a misunderstanding escalated by both parties. But I need to remind you that displaying a firearm, even in self-defense, can have serious consequences. Use caution moving forward." I nodded, relief washing over me. "Thank you," I said sincerely. I never wanted things to go this far. I just wanted to protect my family. As the officers packed up and drove away, I turned to Sarah and the kids. Their faces were pale but hopeful. "It's going to be okay," I told them, pulling them close. "We stood our ground, and people are starting to see Karen for who she really is. That's something, right?" But even as I said the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wouldn't let this go quietly. If anything, she'd double down, determined to prove herself right. For now, though, we were safe and together, and that was enough. The days that followed were a strange mix of relief and unease. On one hand, the immediate threat had passed. The police hadn't pressed charges, and Karen's behavior had been publicly called out, not just by my family, but by several neighbors who finally spoke up about her antics. For the first time in months, it felt like we weren't alone in this fight. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wouldn't let things end here. She wasn't the type to back down quietly, especially after being humiliated in front of the neighborhood. Sure enough, rumors began circulating almost immediately. Some people whispered that Karen was planning to file a formal complaint with the HOA board, accusing me of harassment and intimidation. Others said she was threatening to sue me for emotional distress. None of it surprised me. What did surprise me, though, was how quickly the tide seemed to turn against her. Word spread fast in Willow Creek, and soon enough, more neighbors started coming forward with their own stories about Karen. There was Mrs. Thompson, who revealed that Karen had once reported her for having too many potted plants on her porch, a violation so minor it bordered on absurd. Then there was Mr. Patel, who admitted that Karen had fined him for parking his car slightly over the property line during a family gathering. Even Mr. Alvarez, who rarely got involved in neighborhood drama, shared how Karen had tried to ban children from playing basketball in driveways because the noise disturbed the community's tranquility. As these stories surfaced, Karen's reputation took a nosedive. People who had once tolerated, or even admired, her strict adherence to the rules now saw her for what she truly was, someone who used her position to bully others into submission. Her authority within the HOA, once unshakable, began to crumble. But Karen didn't go quietly. In fact, she doubled down, lashing out at anyone who dared challenge her. She sent angry emails to the entire neighborhood, accusing them of ganging up on her and claiming she was the victim of a smear campaign. She even showed up at a few houses late at night, knocking on doors and demanding explanations from those who had spoken out against her. It was unsettling, to say the least, but most people refused to engage. They'd seen enough of her tactics to know better than to give her any more ammunition. Then came the turning point, the HOA meeting. It was scheduled weeks earlier, long before the incident at my house, but everyone knew it would be a showdown. Neighbors packed the small community center where the meetings were held, filling every seat and spilling into the aisles. The air buzzed with tension as people waited for Karen to arrive. When she finally walked in, her usual confidence seemed shaken. Instead of striding to the front of the room like she owned the place, she hesitated near the doorway, scanning the crowd with wary eyes. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Everyone watched as she took her seat at the head of the table, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. The meeting began with routine updates, budget reports, landscaping schedules, minor rule changes. But no one paid much attention. All eyes were on Karen, waiting to see how she'd respond to the growing rebellion against her leadership. Finally, during the open forum portion of the meeting, a neighbor stood up and addressed the group directly. "I think it's time we talk about Karen," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Her actions have caused division and fear in this community. We deserve transparency and accountability from our HOA board." One by one, others joined in, sharing their grievances and calling for change. By the time it was my turn to speak, the room felt electric, charged with a mix of anger and hope. I recounted what had happened that day in my backyard, emphasizing how Karen's behavior had crossed a line. "This isn't about me or my family," I concluded. "It's about standing up for what's right, for all of us." Karen sat silently throughout the testimonies, her face pale and tight. When it was her turn to respond, she tried to defend herself, but her arguments fell flat. No one believed her anymore. In the end, a vote was called to remove her from her position as HOA president. To everyone's relief, including mine, it passed overwhelmingly. That night, as Sarah and I tucked the kids into bed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. The battle wasn't entirely over. Karen still lived in the neighborhood. After all, but for the first time, it felt like we might actually win. And more importantly, it felt like we weren't fighting alone. In the weeks following Karen's removal as HOA president, Willow Creek began to feel like a different place. The oppressive weight of her rules and constant scrutiny had lifted, leaving behind a neighborhood that felt lighter, freer. People started smiling again, real smiles, not the forced ones they'd worn under Karen's watchful eye. Conversations at the mailbox or over backyard fences became less guarded, more genuine. It was as if the entire community could finally breathe. But while things were improving, I couldn't help but reflect on everything we'd been through. The incident with Karen wasn't just about one bad neighbor. It was a reminder of how quickly power could corrupt, even in small ways. She hadn't set out to become a bully. She'd convinced herself she was doing what was best for the neighborhood. Somewhere along the way, though, she lost sight of the people who lived here. The families, the kids, the everyday struggles and joys that made Willow Creek more than just a collection of houses. Sarah often brought this up during our quiet evenings together. Do you think she ever realized how much harm she caused? She asked one night, sipping tea on the couch. I shrugged, staring out the window at the darkened street. Maybe. But honestly, I don't know if it matters. What's done is done. All we can do now is move forward. And moving forward was exactly what we tried to do. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least, a new version of normal. The kids resumed playing outside without fear of someone watching them or taking photos. Sarah planted flowers in the garden without worrying whether their colors matched some arbitrary guideline. Even I found myself relaxing, no longer glancing over my shoulder every time I stepped onto the porch. Still, there were moments when the past crept back in. One evening, as I was locking up the house before bed, I noticed something odd near the fence line. A piece of paper stuck to the post. My stomach tightened as I walked over to investigate. Was it another note from Karen? Had she decided to retaliate after all? To my relief and slight amusement, it turned out to be nothing more than a flyer advertising a neighborhood potluck. Someone had scribbled a friendly message at the bottom. Hope to see you there. Below it was a doodle of a smiley face. It was such a simple gesture, but it reminded me how far we'd come since those tense days when every knock on the door felt like a threat. The potluck itself was a turning point for the neighborhood. Held in the park down the street, it brought everyone together in a way I hadn't seen before. There were tables piled high with homemade dishes, laughter echoing across the open space, and games that kept the kids entertained for hours. For the first time, I felt like Willow Creek truly was a community, not just a subdivision governed by rules. Karen didn't attend, of course. Rumor had it she was spending less time outdoors these days, keeping to herself in her perfectly manicured home. Part of me felt sorry for her. No matter how much trouble she'd caused, she was still human, still capable of feeling hurt and isolated. But another part of me knew she'd brought it on herself. Her refusal to listen, to compromise, had alienated her from the very people she claimed to care about. As the sun set over the park, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I stood with Sarah and the kids, watching the scene unfold. Jake chased Emma around the playground, giggling uncontrollably, while Sarah chatted with Mrs. Peterson and Mr. Alvarez. A group of neighbors nearby erupted into cheers as someone won a game of cornhole. Feels good, doesn't it? Sarah said, leaning her head on my shoulder. It does, I replied, wrapping an arm around her. Like maybe we're finally home. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, I thought about the gun safe in the garage. It still sat there, locked and unused, a reminder of the lengths I'd gone to protect my family. I hoped I'd never need to touch it again. But if I did, if someone else ever threatened the people I loved, I knew I'd make the same choice. Because at the end of the day, home isn't just a place. It's the people inside it. And protecting them, that's worth whatever it takes.